Hello and welcome to Solidarity, the Resource Center's podcast at UCSC. The purpose of Solidarity is to uplift the voices and actions of students who work at the resource centers or with student organizations. I'm Mark. I use he, his pronouns, and I am an intern here at the ERC who will be hosting today's episode. We have Yu Yao, who is in the background, is the other ERC intern who will help with video editing as well as much needed tech support. Please note that the opinions and views expressed in the episode are of the individuals and do not necessarily reflect the views of the UCSC Resource Centers. Today's episode is titled Actors, Ally, Accomplice. And so basically, to give a little background on this podcast idea, I guess. So last quarter, I attended a Fred facilitation hosted by Fern and Shay, amongst other Fred facilitators, where we talked about and identified various problematic forms of allyship and touched upon the ally industrial complex. Just to provide some context, in the article Accomplices Not Allies, Abolish the Ally Industrial Complex, published by Indigenous Action, article will be linked down below. They define the ally industrial complex to be established by activists whose careers depend on issues they work to address. They often work in the guise of grassroots or community-based and are not necessarily tied to any organization. So coming from that facilitation, I really want to expand on that topic. And in this conversation, we want to better inform our audience on ways in which they can effectively spend their time/resources when standing in solidarity of various social injustices without patronizing the folks who they claim allyship with. We are joined today by our amazing guests, Shay, Saul, and Fern, who will be sharing with us their experiences with toxic allyship, as well as providing us with advice on how our audience can better stand in solidarity for these various social injustices. And to start off, if our guests could share their pronouns, identities, which resource center they are working with, and what is bringing them joy today. What is a peak of your day today?
Hi, my name is Shay Pasinger. I'm a second-year politics major. I work for the African American Resource and Cultural Center. I'm a media intern. Like Mark mentioned, I'm a Fred intern. And yeah, something bringing me joy today. I got a job offer, so my first day of work is Friday. Super excited.
Congrats.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Fern. I use they, them pronouns. I'm also a Fred facilitator, and I'm not sure if the acronym Fred has been explained yet. If it has, I'm sorry, but I'll just go through it again. We are facilitators for racial and ethnic diversity. That's what Fred is. I am bigender. I work for the African American Resource and Cultural Center, like Shay. And what brings me joy? I discovered a new way to make tea that makes me really happy. I got one of those little frothing ones. So I'm taking my tea making to the next level. So yeah, I'm pretty happy.
My name is Saul Starr. I'm a third-year earth science major with a concentration in environmental geology. I work at the ARC as well, alongside Jay. I'm a ARC media intern as well, so I'm not Fred facilitator. But I had my therapist session today, so that was awesome. And something that's just bringing me joy recently is outside of just today. It's just my sister committed to UCLA recently, so I'm super happy about that. So yeah, we got a banana slug and a Bruin finally, so it's pretty cool.
Pretty cool. Thank y'all so much. Starting off our first question, I guess this one is more towards the Fred facilitators since they've had a background knowledge, especially with the Fred facilitations. In your words, how would you define an ally and accomplice? And what are some key characteristics of an ally and accomplice?
I really want to start here by making the distinction. We're going to talk about a lot, about the differences between them. I want to really point out before we even start that an ally is not a bad thing. It's definitely not, something you should be ashamed for, identifying as presently or in the past. But I kind of want to make the distinction that ally is kind of a midpoint and accomplice is really where you want to end up and gear yourself towards. So I think that to articulate it best, let me think. So an ally would probably be someone who will fight for you, they will help you out, but at the end of the day, an accomplice is somebody that will go to jail for you, that will, block barricades for you and really just put their life with your life. And that's not to say that, an ally isn't going to fight for you, an ally isn't going to, fight the good fight, but an accomplice is really someone who's willing to take it, a step further and, really just fight that fight right alongside you.
Yeah, see, Shay, that's why I wanted you to start because like that was just perfect. I like what helps me differentiate between ally and accomplice. And again, I want to reiterate what Shay said that it is like allyship. Like I know that we've kind of talked about, or we're going to talk about maybe some like tropes or aspects of it that haven't been as helpful as they could be. But it isn't, and like it's not a negative thing to have identified as that. And if you're learning about accomplice for the first time on this podcast, like it's totally fine because this is kind of an emerging term, even though it's been used in the past. For me, differentiating between an ally and an accomplice kind of comes down to intention in some moments. Like if you're an ally, you're involving yourself in a moment, and an accomplice is more of a movement. But again, like allyship, like it can go to those levels of like, yeah, like fighting for the communities that have been like disenfranchised and discriminated against. But we actually show a video in our Fred facilitations that asks the questions of accomplices, like, are you willing to drive the getaway car? Are you willing to like put yourself forward in maybe uncomfortable situations in a way that allyship hasn't really uh, presented those opportunities as consistently. That's at least that's from my understanding, or that's what I've seen in the past with accomplishment and allyship.
Great. Thank you both so much. Just to like build off of your points, or just agree off of your points, I really agree with Shay. Your initial, well, not interpretation, but like you saying that allyship and accompliceship isn't like a good or bad thing, but like a midpoint and endpoint. Because, and as well as Fern, how intention is also like another thing that's really important for the person that's going in and wanting to, put themselves there to help. Part of the intentions is like people always have to like introspectively look into themselves on like what the real reasons that they want to help as well, because then there's also a lot of gray space for allyship that we will touch upon later on in this podcast, and how involved you are willing to become too. Are you willing to become that accomplice? Moving on to the second question. As we have seen last summer a lot with how toxic ally culture could be, what are some forms of quote unquote problematic allyship that y'all have witnessed in the past?
It's an interesting question because some people may have different answers for what can be toxic. I think like generally there is a like a normal quote unquote normal boundary that is set around like being toxic. So what I mean by that is like telling people how to feel about a certain situation. I can give an example for this. So like recently we had the Derek Chauvin verdict, and I didn't initially know how to feel about it because obviously, it's a win, and quote unquote win meaning like he's going to jail, and obviously jail is not for me personally, jail is not the best outcome. I feel like there needs to be re-education, and we can talk about that a different day. But I think like um, there is like I had people reach out to me saying like, oh, like how do you feel about this, like, and then I told them like I don't know how to feel about it because it's a win, but then it's also like showing that like the system is not really changing because like I think it was an hour after the Derek Chauvin verdict. What was their name? I think it was Ma'Khia Bryant was murdered. So it's like we take one step forward, two steps back. And so like I guess to like come back to the original question, I had people coming to me saying like, you know, you should feel this type of way. You should feel like justice. You should feel, you know, like happy about it. And like, yes, I am happy, but then at the same time, it's like the fight's not over, right? And so like centering yourself in what you feel about other people's situations is not the I would say is like toxic ally culture, because like allyship is not about you. It's about being there for the people who are like experiencing these like situations by themselves, i.e. racism and everything else. So I think like that's been my like most recent experience with it. I'm sure like Shay and Fern have other experiences that they can talk about.
I kind of want to jump off of what Zola said in the middle, somewhere folks were reaching out to him and asking him his experiences and how he felt. And so this kind of brings me to my answer that I think the most problematic allyship that I've seen, especially in this past year, has been the ally savior complex, which is all of the sudden there's a bunch of these folks that are learning about the issues that maybe they weren't aware of before and they want to fight for us. And that's awesome and that's great. But sometimes what ends up happening is that these folks, their voices and their new voices and their white voices, they're drowning out the voices of the folks who have been there the whole time. You know, the Black folks and the brown folks, the people that need to be fought for. They're getting drowned out by these white folks who come in and they really have this savior complex. Some of you guys may have heard of this before. I think I learned about it in high school, maybe, where this idea of the white savior is that sure, they'll throw this character into a book or a movie, and even if it's about Black folks, even if it's, you know, about Black power and all of that, there is this character that's there and is white and is, you know, helping out. And it really leads to this idea that could the story have even happened without this white savior, you know? Like, were they even necessary, or are they just, you know, always being depicted that way? So definitely for me, it's the white savior. I mean, I'm going to tell a short story. I was on Twitter last year and I had this dude that I went to high school with, and I'd known him, I grew up with him. And, you know, it was, I want to say when George Floyd just got killed and they had identified Chauvin and the riots were starting. And he said, you know, this chaos, this is so awesome. I'm so proud of us. And I responded to him. It kind of rubbed me the wrong way. It took me a long time to decide if I wanted to respond to. I sent it to a couple friends. I was like, do I even want to engage with him? Like, he's a really good friend of mine. Fight with him. And it's just, we started going back and forth. And I was like, I don't think chaos is the right word here. I really appreciate you joining the movement. That's awesome. But, you know, chaos probably isn't the word here. This was 2 days after former President Trump tweeted that all the thugs in, you know, the protests, they deserve to be like shot and gunned down. And it was a scary time for Black folks. And this was just, you know, 2 days after that. And we went back and forth. And he really was just trying to tell me, he's like, well, I'm a politics major. I'm at Davis. I know what I'm talking about. And it was like, man, I'm a politics major. I'm at Santa Cruz and I'm also Black. And I've been on the front lines for years and years and years and years. And I don't need you to come in here and tell me what's going on. And he was really embodying this white savior. And, you know, he wasn't even a white guy. He's a dude of color. But it was still just trying to fill this role of you guys and your group needs to be saved. And I'm the person to save it because I know what to do. And that's just, that's not true. That's not conducive to our movement as a whole. You know, we are strong and powerful with you, and we are strong and powerful without you. So we don't need you, your one person, your one body to save us and to say that that's what's happening there.
Yeah, I mean, to piggyback off Shay, this is I'm trying to find like the best way to bridge this, but I think with white savior, one thing I noticed in particular is it is about like it is like taking up a lot of space, and like an ally, the type of ally that like I also think kind of sneaks into conversations and like takes up space. And I think these allies are very well intentioned, but it's also it just is not helpful, is the guilty ally. The one that spends an entire, like if you're in a conversation, like I've seen this in a lot of discussion sections, and I'll fully admit that I have been this ally. I have been this person that in a space, instead of just like kind of like shutting up and let people talk and like hearing how I can be like helpful and how I can like take action in a community, like I instead apologize, being like, I am so sorry I'm really sorry that like my ancestors are terrible people. I'm sorry that this is like basically like apologizing on behalf of society. And like, yeah, obviously society is trash. Obviously there's a lot of systemic issues, but apologizing for them profusely isn't solving the problem, because it's not like the systemic issues can hear this one person saying, oh, I'm sorry this happened. The systemic issues just like, oh, they apologized, I'm gone. Like it doesn't happen. And that's why I say like the guilty ones are really well, like I think they're well intentioned. I think they think that they are earning the trust of POCs and like just communities that have been like discriminated against. Like I think that they think they're earning the trust by apologizing and say, look, I'm one of the good ones. But in the end, we show our solidarity through our actions and not necessarily through our words. Like we should be showing up and not like, and it's good to speak up, but when you're profusely apologizing over and over again for your whiteness or for your identities that may have privilege, you're speaking over and you're not speaking up for those communities. Like you're drowning them out. It literally is white noise to apologize. And again, I will admit that I've been like that, and I had to learn. And like it can be really it can be really hard to learn that what you thought was really positive allyship is actually not helping a movement. But in those moments of discomfort is actually where we're able to move forward and be way more productive. You have to face that discomfort. Like it's just a part of the process, because if you come across this discomfort realizing that you've messed up at any point in trying to support these communities, and then just kind of back away from it, then you're not going to really get to that next level where you are being an accomplice, where you are taking direction like directly from community leaders and individuals who need your support. It's just kind of like passing through this fog. Like you don't know what it's going to be like. You know, it's going to be like kind of painful to admit that you screwed up. It doesn't feel good, but you learn from your moments of mistakes. And that's one thing that I had to learn. And that's one of the reasons why I do try, like I still have friends that are the guilty ones. I have friends that, be like, oh, I'm so sorry. I'm like, hey, we're gonna find a more constructive way to use our identities and use our privilege. Like we're gonna like look at different angles instead of just apologizing, because that it's just not getting us anywhere.
Thank you all so much for those. And I guess just to like piggyback of all of that was, we're not here to discourage people from, or our audience from like continuing or going out and like being accomplices for people or being allies for people, but instead we want them to acknowledge like, oh, maybe I have done this in the past and this is the result of that. So what are ways that I'm going to actively, proceed in the future going forward? But anyways, continuing off of question 2, what are some examples of positive allyship or accomplishship that you have witnessed in the past?
Yeah, I think like positive from what I've seen is like I think like I said before, each person has their different ways of needing support. So for me personally, like I like seeing support in a way where like let's say something tragic happens like like literally last week or 2 weeks ago. As I said, like people were reaching out to me. I like that kind of support in which I know that like my friends are here for me, and like my allies are here for me. So they will like send me texts or like call me and be like, "Hey, are you okay?" And just like giving space for folks to like to vent, to hold space, and just to like listen. I think like that is really important, just because those people in the community may be going through it. I know like I was going through it last week, like when the verdict happened, or whenever the verdict happened. I think it was 2 weeks ago or last week. I talked to a bunch of friends and was like just venting about how I felt, and like that was a way of like supporting me. And I think like establishing those boundaries of like, how can I support you in a time of need, I think is the best way to be like a better ally. If you're like trying to reflect and see like, how can I be a better ally or accomplice to like a community or a person of color. I think like that's really important.
I have a positive example. I live in Berkeley, California. So there's a lot of, intersections here. There's a large unhoused population. There's a BART station. There's the students that live here. And I feel like every day I see right by the BART stop, there's like 4 police cars, 2 buses just parked, ambulances, everything. And it's on, Shattuck, the main street. And so you see it, everybody sees it. And I feel like it was probably 2 times ago that this happened, that I saw this girl on the corner just recording, hanging out, not really doing anything. I'm making assumptions here, but I'm assuming she just had the time that day, like good for her. But just, existing there and being eyes. Because in this time of like growing technology and video footage and social media, I mean, I feel like a lot of issues have come forward and they're being given eyes now because folks are being able to see them in, post time just after that. And I feel like simultaneously cops are extra aware that there's more eyes on them. So they're scared of these cameras. They're scared of these folks standing and watching. And so that just really struck me. It was like, wow, this girl had the time. So she saw something happening. Like we all saw it happening, but just being there, being another pair of eyes, being someone that was going to hold these folks accountable if the cops that, the individual that the cops had stopped didn't make it out to hold them accountable, and that was just a big one for me, even though it was just, this little thing. Like she was just standing on the corner about 15 feet away with her phone.
Yeah. Thank you all so much for identifying like positive allyship or accompliceships that you have witnessed in the past. I think one like overarching theme of it all might be like situational awareness, whether it be being someone to listen to someone vent to or recording, be an extra pair of eyes to the police and like whatever, things that they might be conducting over there, to seeing that, oh, I am this group of people aren't representing like the company as a whole. You always have to like take an account of the situation and ways that maybe you could positively contribute to the overall situation. Have you noticed any narratives or stories that people have believed in rooted in anti-Blackness that many people who practice performative allyship seem to buy into?
Yeah, I was talking about that white savior complex. I got into it a little earlier than I had planned to, but now you guys know what soapbox I stand on. So I, had for this answer white savior complex because I feel like it's just something that not a lot of folks are aware of. Like even as a Black identifying person, it took somebody pointing it out to me for me to even, realize, oh yeah, they do throw a white person in all of our movies. Like Zaul and I were talking about it, at a different time and date about Black Panther. And the white dude in Black Panther is Martin Freeman, whoever he played. And, the cop and how, he didn't really, need to be there. It was a Black film. It was a Black, like, power film. Like, we're superheroes. We don't need this white cop next to us to make us feel valid. And, me and Zell were kind of talking about whether or not Martin Freeman filled this role because we both kind of came up with the answer that overall he was useless. Like as a character, he was pretty useless. And so I feel like maybe that was even a positive example because he was supposed to be this white savior. And he was just this useless guy. Like he was always around being British and just messing stuff up. Like it was a really, it was not what you normally see out of the white savior. It was refreshing, I feel like, after this extra scrutiny.
Yeah, I think like if anything, like I think his name or Martin Freeman's character's name was like Special Agent Ross or something, if I remember correctly. But if anything, like he gave the intelligence of the CIA to Black Panther so that they can do what they needed to do. But like, yeah, I think in that conversation that we had, it was just like, why even put the character in? Or like, even if you did put the character in, couldn't you have casted someone else like that was Black person or person of color, right? So I think that was an interesting conversation to have. Me, like what I've noticed, it's interesting because like there will be people who will try to be allies and not recognize that the barriers or not recognize that barriers and biases exists within like different systems of like higher education or like the police department in society, anything. Like it's interesting to kind of be like to not recognize that like these marginalized communities can't actually work harder, work smarter, and like be more creative, and like the idea of like pulling yourself up by your bootstraps just because like the system itself is flawed. Like the way that it is structured is not for like people of color. It's not for indigenous folks. It's not for Black folks. And so like the idea of like, oh, you can just do this. You should be able to do this. And it's like, no, we don't have those resources, or like we just don't have the time, or we just don't have the energy, because everything else that we've tried to do has just gotten us to where we are like now currently, right? And so like the idea of like not recognizing those barriers and not trying to like knock those down and just like trying to work within the system is like, I don't know, I see that as like kind of anti-Black in a way, just because like if you're going to be an ally and you try to do your best in helping, then I feel like you should educate yourself on the reasons why like the system itself is flawed, and why we do the things that we do, and why we go about solving certain issues through like different avenues than like what's quote unquote normal.
Yeah, and like on the topic of like just educating yourself on the barriers, also thinking about who the educators are. Like one thing that the one thing I've really noticed is the popularity of the book White Fragility. As like, because as last summer there was all these like reading lists coming out about like how to be anti-racist. Like here's your anti-racist reading list, here's your anti-racist podcast list. And White Fragility was consistently like at the top of these lists. And it's still like a really big number one seller, but it was written by a white person. I forget her first name, like I believe the last name is D'Angelo. I like she like I think it's well, and I think it's well intentioned. She's a sociologist. Like she is like right from this perspective, but it's you can't like educate, like it's you're educating white people on how to be anti-racist, but like you're a white person, so it's like your perspective on how to be anti-racist. Like you should be listening to actual community leaders, like people who hold those identities. Like you should be listening to Black authors. Like some books, in case you are like listening to this podcast and you're like, oh, but White Fragility is like the only like book I've ever seen. Well, a couple of alternatives are How to Be Anti-Racist by Ibum X. Kendi. So you want to talk about race by Ijuamo Jolu. I'm sorry if I butchered her name. I feel terrible. But then there's also like any of Isabel Wilkerson's books. Like I think it's really important that you think about who your educators are. Like also like one thing is like on TikTok, you see like I don't know, like white TikTokers like getting a lot more like TikTok, Instagram, like insert any actually like any social media platform here, like a white influencer, white content creator will post an infographic or a video and it'll get way more likes than an actual than like a Black creator who will create the exact same story or talk about it from the same perspective, or like talk about the same content. And I really just think that like we should be uplifting the voices of people who actually understand the experience and not continue to support like those who are just kind of playing telephone with the information. And because that also kind of goes into the idea of like, are you actually trying to support them and uplift voices, or is it clout? So like thinking about who your educators are, like where you're getting your information from, and making sure it's from the individuals who hold the actual like identities of the community you're trying to support.
Wow. First of all, thank you so much for giving those resources out, Fern, with those books for people to check out. Yeah, like I agree with all of y'all's points where like there's a lack, well, not a lack of knowledge, but all the knowledge for a lot of folks who do practice performative allyship or just some sort of like disingenuine allyship. they tend to be pretty surface level with their understanding, and then they just like jump in. But but then another thing with like narratives is a lot of the times it's just like so ingrained with things that you don't even realize it until someone actually points it out to you. So it's like you really have folks gotta stay on it, make sure you're actually looking into things instead of like keeping it relatively surface level, because it's everywhere. But anyways, moving on to question 4. So this is a pretty big-ish question, but so what should people do? What would you recommend to our listeners who would like to become better accomplices?
What I think folks should do is probably just shut up. And I say that, and it sounds really harsh, and it's meant to be a little harsh. I want you to kind of stop and think for a second. Because like I feel like I really just keep coming back to this point of like you really need to be listening to the folks that you're fighting for. You really need to be uplifting voices rather than speaking over them. Like Blackout Tuesday, that felt so infuriating because a lot of the work that I do in my own communities is, uplift Black voices, don't speak over Black folks, let Black folks speak for themselves. And then all of a sudden there was this just huge trend of, well, I support Black Lives Matter, so I'm going to post Blackout Tuesday and I'm going to call out people who didn't post Blackout Tuesday, because I saw that a lot too. Or is this witch hunt where it was, I'm unfollowing everybody that doesn't have a Black square posted. Well, you can unfollow every single Black person that you follow because I promise you nobody posted it. Because as Black folks, we recognize that, when there's stuff like this, traditionally Black voices are drowned out, and this just felt engineered to drown us out. Like it was crazy. So I feel like in that time period, in that little time frame where it felt like the world was ending and there was this race war happening, everybody was spurred to do something, and that was a great push, and that was so awesome. And folks just need to keep going, like take that push. I feel like summer of, I guess it's 2020 now, I feel like it radicalized a lot of folks. And so I really invite you, going back to my point of just shut up, so I really want to make sure that you are listening to folks in your lives who are marginalized. That's a funny way to say it, listen to marginalized people, but like do it. Yeah, they know better than you do, better than you can study, better than you can observe, better than you can learn in your classes about race and theory and politics and government. Because that's, like I said at the beginning, that's my major, and it's a major full of white kids who want to tell me, this Black student in their class, that they know better than me because they read race theory, And I always tell them, I'm like, dude, just shut up. Like, you don't know what you're saying. You learned what you're saying. That's it. You learned what you're saying and you're parroting it back to me, who's living those experiences. And so just shut up. It means listen. It doesn't just start and end with shut up. It means shut up and listen to folks in your life who know what's going on, who are living experiences, folks who in your life who might be activists, organizers. I have a lot of them in my life. I'm probably the head activist in my little friend group, but like they're not hard to find at Santa Cruz. You can throw a rock and hit 3 activists at Santa Cruz. So I mean, it's a matter of seeking these people out. And I understand that there's varying degrees of difficulty here, but like I encourage you, really just seek them out, and like Fern said, source these voices. Make sure that these voices that are educating you and teaching you are voices that you trust, that Black folks trust, that Asian folks trust, that Pacific Islanders trust. Like, make sure that these are vetted sources as well. But so once you've shut up, you can them and then take what you've learned and just don't, speak over other folks. You can do your part to educate other, people that you come across. Just try to do it in a way that's not over folks,
And I think, I guess, yeah, like what I'm about to say is kind of like not in the same vein as shut up, because I do agree. Like, yes, like you should not talk. You should be listening. Like, it's not your space. Like, you're like, yeah, I'm a history major, so I get people talking about the past where they're like, oh, well, that's not a thing anymore. I'm like, no, the whole point of history is that you look at how past discrimination still has massive tremors, I would even say earthquakes in our modern society. And it's always people playing devil's advocate. That's my soapbox. There's no devil's advocate when it comes to the rights and identities of human beings. So anyway, that's my soapbox. But like on the same vein of like identities, one like I guess like one word that came out that I think really for some reason like made people so uncomfortable last summer was white privilege, or I guess one phrase. And the thing is like they wanted to deny like with their whole being that they did not have white privilege. I'm like, listen, you can deny it all you want, but like you have it, and like you can't like it's so you can either just like completely reject it and just like not be productive. And like I get that it's like an uncomfortable process for people to realize that like certain things in life are better for them because of their skin color. Like it's hard for people to admit that, and I understand. But once that journey is over, like once you come to terms with it, like now this is where some real activism can happen. Like understanding that your privilege can be used like to help empower and like help give spaces, or also help protect. Like one thing I really took from the cola protests last summer, or last winter and spring, was the education that I received as a white protester saying like, hey, put yourself in between the police and bodies of color. And I'm like, yes, okay. Because if we get arrested, it's a slap on the wrist. Like, because that's just our police system is corrupt, and it's built around like protecting white people. And so it's at most you're gonna probably get a slap on the wrist, but this, a police encounter could be lethal. It could be the end of a person of color's life. And it's unfortunate and tragic that that is how our society is. But if you, because of like, if you can like help prevent that just by being in between like a cop and a person of color, like that is using your privilege for power. Like that is helping protect. And then, yeah, if you're in a space where you have the power to get people of color into decision-making spaces, and then like, kind of like, hey, like this is a person who should be voicing their opinion in this workspace. Like get them in there, then you can back out and be like, cool, like now we have like some real momentum going. Like there are ways that you can like utilize your privilege to be an accomplice, and it can be uncomfortable to admit that you have privilege. And one thing that I heard a lot was like, yeah, like I may be white, but I also have like this issue and this issue. I'm like, yeah, and that's fine that you don't have like privilege in every single one of your identities. But I once heard somebody say that your whiteness is the heaviest thing about you. Like it's something that is very like and I think it's really powerful, because yes, like you may be white and you may be trans, or maybe white, maybe a woman. Like, yeah, your other identities may have their own like discrimination, but your whiteness will like be the biggest thing protecting you. So you can use that to protect other people and like get other people into the spaces where real decision making can happen and real change can happen. So don't be afraid to use your privilege for power. Like just accept that it's a part of you and it's okay. But then like work to make it so that, we should be working to make sure that it's like less of a privilege, like so that, there's more like across the board acceptance and less discrimination. But at this current moment, it is privilege, and you should be using it in a more productive way.
Yeah, I just want to echo both of those points. Those were amazing, like well said, like just amazing points. So yeah, I just had to say like that was really cool to hear, and like even as a like activist, as a Black person, like I'm still learning and I still have questions. And so if you ever have questions, I guess this is my thing. I guess what I recommend is like if you ever have questions about like what you heard in this podcast, or like what you should do in a certain situation, or how you can help someone, I think be active in accessing that education and becoming educated, and like um, asking questions that are meaningful, um, and making sure that your approach in asking those questions is careful, because I know that in some time, like let's say we have God forbid we have another George Floyd, but let's say that that does happen, hypothetically, and in that week you go to someone that you trust and you say, hey, I have questions for you. That might not be the best time to ask questions about some a situation, or like a theory that you have, or um, about anything. I think that's the correct time in which you would use your situational awareness and like probably hold space for them. So I think like understanding your privilege is huge. Like just shutting up and listening is like very, very huge. Inviting folks into those like key decision spaces is also like a really big one. But also like if you have a question and you just don't know the answer to, and you want to ask these, if you want to ask like BIPOC folks, some people you trust, I think that's like a good thing to do, because if you don't ask questions, then you're not really critically thinking and learning about the systems that are put in place and what we actually have to like deal with. And I think like that's like important to do as well. But yeah.
Oh, thank y'all so much. Well, those I'm like on the same note as Saul, like y'all but all said that like amazingly. So I'm just gonna move on over to the last question. As we conclude, what are some nonprofit/student organizations that y'all support and think our audience should look into, or just any other materials? And also, all of this material is going to be linked down in the description of this video.
All right, I got you. I want to preface this whole thing by going on a mini soapbox rant where I tell you guys, please, please, please do not give any money to BLM as an organization. And that's not because I don't support BLM, that's not because I don't support their work. But basically, what happened is last summer, there is this new lens, like this huge media lens being placed on Black issues and how we can help them. And everyone's saying Black Lives Matter. And so folks, they are taking that Black Lives Matter and they're going, okay, cool, here's an org. We're all going to give our money here. And so millions and millions of dollars are pouring into Black Lives Matter as an organization. And the thing is, Black Lives Matter was never meant to deal with that much money, So they don't have the infrastructure for it. They don't have the folks. They don't even have the folks to give it to. And so there is all this money and nobody knows how to spend it. And nobody knows, where to get it to, because Black Lives Matter, that's Black folks everywhere, Whereas what I'm going to suggest now is if you have the means, if you would like to make a monetary donation, then I would encourage you, instead of donating to, Black Lives Matter, that big umbrella organization, to maybe pick a local issue. If you live in a city, there's tons of funds available. Like I said, probably 3 or 4 times by now. I live in Berkeley, so there's a lot of unhoused folks. There's a lot of Black and queer folks. There's a lot of spillover from all of those identities that exist in Oakland and in San Francisco. And so when I, have the means to donate to monetary organizations, I look in my community for folks who are doing work on the ground, folks who can name, the names of the people where the money is going to go to. Or sometimes it's, direct relief funds where it's giving that money directly to Black folks. I feel like I see a lot of them on Twitter, but that's just because that's the Twitter user that I am. I see a lot of relief funds. And, that's a completely valid way to give your resources, because another part of it is the folks who are getting this money directly. Say that you choose to donate to John Doe and John Doe now has the money directly. John Doe knows exactly what to do with this money. John Doe knows that his rent is late and that the payment is going to go there. He knows that how much, it costs to put his dinner on the table. That's what he knows. If you give it to these organizations, sometimes these organizations don't know, that it would be best used for rent, that John Doe needs X amount of money, that somebody else needs X amount of money. And I really just, it's putting faith and it's putting trust in these folks who are getting this money, that they know how to use their money, and they know how to use their money correctly. I feel like I've seen a lot of it around COVID relief checks where folks are like, well, they shouldn't be giving COVID relief checks directly to Americans because what are they going to do with it? Just buy crab legs? Like, these Americans are buying crab legs because they know that's what well, crab legs is an exaggeration, but they're buying food because they know that's what they need. They need food, Maybe that's, or not even maybe, that is a priority for them. And that's that's valid, you know, like that's okay. And it's kind of taking a step back from this paternalist approach where it's, oh, I know what everybody else needs better than they know what they need. That's just not it. And so that was my big, huge preface for throwing in a couple of those big organizations that do work. These are mostly on the South. These came from the research that I do with unrelated stuff. So I work for M for BL, which is Movement for Black Lives. So they're a huge umbrella organization who parent a ton of little organizations, like I just said, all around the country. And they basically are this parent to these little organizations, but they're a good way to get started to find your little organization. You know, so maybe it's not M for BL, but maybe it's the chapter that's in your city or your region. So yes, also the Black feminist future, because as a Black female assigned person, I feel like we need a lot of help, and these folks are out here offering that help through, you know, resources like that.
I do want to say that was pretty much perfectly said by Shay. Donate to people who are in direct need directly. I think I said that correctly. I think BLM, like as a movement, has a global foundation now that you can donate to, but I would highly suggest what Shay basically said and donating to these people directly and not going through like another org to give to another like other smaller org in a sense, or like smaller people, just giving that direct line of support in terms of like money. That's like what I think would probably be the best. There's different ways to support. One of them is money, and so another one is like giving food or holding space for people. I think like giving housing, and I think the two that I would highly suggest is Food Not Bombs. There's a Santa Cruz chapter. They work on giving food to whoever is in need to it. There's like about 1,000 chapters, I think, all over the country. So I would definitely go and support them. And I think so, yes. And then Moms for Housing, they are a org where they started because they needed housing in Oakland. Black mothers just went up and needed housing because they were being evicted. And so they created an org, and I think like definitely supporting them is really important. They're based out of Oakland, so those are the two that I would like to highlight. I think in terms of student organizations on campus, I think supporting all of our ethnic orgs. I think especially at a time like right now and coming into the next year when we're going to be half in person, from what I understand, I think that's really important. Showing up for them when there's a political action, when there's anything. I think doing that is very, very, very important. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, y'all pretty much touched on it. I think for UCSC in particular, one day or like one thing to look out for, like mark your calendars the second you find out what date it is. But Giving Day on our campus is actually really cool. It's a chance for you to learn about a lot of like student orgs and like give to them directly. One in particular that they always do really well, but like I think that they could like you can always like keep giving money is SACNAS. I believe it's the hold on, I've had the acronym pulled up. It's the Society for Advancement of Chicanos, Hispanics, and Native Americans. I think it's also like directed towards STEM. Like, and what's really cool about Giving Day is that there's like all of the different groups are, and it's across like the different student interests. You have everything from like dance troupes to student clubs. But if you're looking to particularly give to like ethnic student groups or like different affinity student groups, you can find those like pretty easily, and just so that's a really great chance to give like money and like physical funds. But also if certain groups need maybe volunteer work or like Saul said, like giving space or something else, like in kind donations are really important. Like if you have connections for businesses or like you can get them Like things like if they have an event coming up and you can hook them up with some free catering, or like anything that you can do to like it's the little things. Like, you know, we may not be able to give like a ton of money, especially as college students, but if your family member has a restaurant, or if your family member runs like a local business that can give physical items to help other fundraising efforts, that's a really, you know, that's one way that you can help utilize your own networks to support other student orgs. Because I understand it can be really difficult as a student to be able to give, but that's when we can just use our networks, or at the very least, like spread the word about certain events. Like if you could spread the word about a fundraiser within your own network, like that also is helpful. So it's like the little things, like so they can really make a difference, especially for students at UCSC.
All right. Well, just like that, we have come to an end of our conversation. I want to extend another thank you to Shay, Saul, and Fern for joining us today during our conversation, as well as a thank you to Desiree, Yuyao, Cameron, Abby, and Kaz for all the behind the scenes background work that they've also done. If you've enjoyed our conversation that we've had today and would like to hear more, because we have future podcasts planned, feel free to subscribe to this YouTube channel, and any nonprofit orgs/student organizations that we discussed today, whether also like reading material as well, will be linked in the description of this video. Thank you so much. Goodbye. Stay safe. Get vaccinated.